The warm summer breeze carried the acrid scent of smoke long before Sophia Keller spotted the orange glow on the horizon. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she urged her chestnut mare to greater speed, the thundering hooves kicking up dust from the dry Montana plains. It was 1875, and at 22 years old, she had never seen a prairie fire of this magnitude, a wall of flames that devoured everything in its path, moving with terrifying speed across the drought-stricken grasslands. Pa! She screamed as she neared the modest homestead where she'd lived all her life. The barn was already engulfed, flames licking at the night sky, sparks dancing on the wind that pushed the fire ever closer to their cabin. Her father emerged from the cabin, face blackened with soot, waving frantically. "Sophia, get back, there's no time." But she wouldn't leave without him. Sophia leaped from her horse, the mare skittish and wild-eyed at the approaching inferno. The heat pressed against her face as she ran toward her father, who was desperately trying to save what little he could from their home. "Pa, we have to go now." She grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. "The deed. I can't leave without the deed to our land." He turned back toward the cabin just as the roof caught fire, the dry timber crackling like gunshots in the night. "It's too late." Sophia cried, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. She grabbed her father's hand, dragging him toward her horse, but the frightened animal had bolted, leaving them stranded as the fire crept ever closer. The deafening roar of the flames drowned out all other sounds, the smoke thickening with each passing second. Sophia's lungs burned as she struggled to breathe, her vision blurring. They wouldn't make it on foot, the fire moved too fast, consuming everything in its path with voracious hunger. Just when hope seemed lost, the thundering of hooves cut through the crackling of the flames. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the smoky darkness, the brim of his hat pulled low over his eyes. "Get on," the stranger shouted, extending his hand toward Sophia. Prairie fire runs faster than hooves. Without hesitation, Sophia pushed her father forward, and the cowboy hauled him onto the back of his sturdy black stallion. Then he reached down for her, his strong hand gripping hers with surprising gentleness despite the urgency of the moment. "Hold tight." The cowboy commanded as he spurred his horse forward, away from the flames that had now completely engulfed the Keller cabin. They raced across the darkened plains, the fire chasing them like a ravenous beast. The cowboy steered his horse toward a line of cottonwoods in the distance, a telltale sign of water in the parched landscape. "Into the creek, down, hold on." The cowboy shouted over his shoulder as they approached the tree line. The horse plunged down the steep embankment, splashing into the shallow creek below. Sophia clung to the cowboy's waist, her father's arms wrapped around her as the water swirled around them. "Stay low," the cowboy instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "The fire will jump over us, but the water will keep us safe." Sophia buried her face against his back, breathing in the scent of leather and sweat as the roar of the flames grew louder. The heat intensified, and she could hear the sizzle of embers hitting the water around them. The horse trembled beneath them but remained steady, trusting its rider completely. For what seemed like an eternity, they huddled in the creek as the prairie fire raged overhead, a bridge of flame spanning from one bank to the other. The cowboy's arm reached back protectively, holding Sophia close, and in that moment of terror and ash, she felt strangely safe. When the worst of the fire had passed, leaving the world smoldering and black, the cowboy helped them to the shore. In the gray light of dawn, Sophia finally saw his face clearly handsome despite the soot that smudged his strong jaw, with kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he attempted a reassuring smile. "Name's Flynn Yates," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Reckon you folks could use a place to stay." Sophia's father, exhausted and in shock, could only nod gratefully. "James Keller," he managed, extending a trembling hand. "And my daughter, Sophia, you saved our lives, Mr. Yates." "Just Flynn, please," the cowboy replied, clasping James's hand firmly. "And I did what anyone would have done." But as Sophia's gaze met Flynn's, she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have ridden toward a raging prairie fire to save strangers. Not everyone would have known how to escape the flames. And as the sun rose over the scorched earth, illuminating the devastation around them, Sophia realized that everything had changed in the space of a single night. Flynn led them to his horse, which stood patiently at the water's edge. "My ranch is about 5 miles south of here. It's not much, but you're welcome to stay until you get back on your feet." Sophia's father hesitated, a proud man unaccustomed to charity. But the reality of their situation, homeless, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, left him little choice. "We're much obliged, Mr. Yates. Flynn, we won't impose for long." Flynn helped James onto the horse first, then offered his hand to Sophia. When their fingers touched, she felt a spark that had nothing to do with the smoldering landscape around them. As she settled behind her father, arms wrapped around his waist for stability, she couldn't help but notice Flynn's broad shoulders as he led the horse on foot, picking a careful path through the blackened terrain. Flynn's ranch was indeed modest, a sturdy cabin with a small barn and corral set against the backdrop of the rolling Montana hills. A creek, the same one that had saved their lives, wound its way through the property, providing water for his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden that surprised Sophia with its lushness amid the dry landscape. "It ain't much," Flynn said as he helped Sophia down from his horse, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," she replied honestly, taking in the simple yet well-kept homestead. After the terror of the night, the peaceful setting felt like a sanctuary. Flynn showed them to a small room at the back of the cabin. "This was my pa's room before he passed last winter," he explained, his voice softening with memory. "It's yours for as long as you need it, Mr. Keller. What about Sophia?" James asked, concern etching deeper lines into his already weathered face. Flynn scratched his head awkwardly. "Well, I've got a cot I can set up in the main room for her if that's suitable, or I can take the cot myself and she can have my room." "The cot will be fine," Sophia interjected quickly, not wanting to displace their rescuer any more than they already had. "I'm just grateful for a roof over our head." That night, as Sophia lay on the narrow cot, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of Flynn's cabin, she stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about everything they'd lost. The family Bible with generations of names recorded inside. Her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved despite the years since her passing. The small collection of books that had been her escape on long winter evenings. All gone, reduced to ash in the hungry flames of the prairie fire. A soft footstep caught her attention, and she turned to see Flynn moving quietly through the main room, careful not to wake her. He stepped outside onto the porch, leaving the door slightly ajar. After a moment's hesitation, Sophia wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and followed. Flynn stood at the porch railing, gazing out at the night sky scattered with stars. He turned at the sound of the door, offering a small smile when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. Sophia shook her head, joining him at the railing. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames." Flynn nodded in understanding. Prairie fires are like that, they burn their way into your memory. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the night air cool against their skin, so different from the searing heat of the fire. Finally, Sophia spoke again. "How did you know?" "To find us, I mean." Flynn's gaze remained on the distant horizon, where the faintest orange glow still marked the fire's path. "I was riding fence when I saw the smoke. Figured it was headed for the Keller place, your place. I'd never met you folks, but I knew there was a homestead in that direction." "You rode toward the fire," Sophia said, not a question but a statement of wonderment. "Most people would have ridden the other way." Flynn shrugged, the movement barely visible in the dim light. "Guess I'm not most people." "No," Sophia agreed softly. "You certainly are not." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Sophia was the first to look away, suddenly conscious of her nightgown beneath the blanket and the impropriety of their midnight conversation. "I should try to sleep," she murmured, turning toward the door. "Miss Keller," Flynn called softly, stopping her. When she looked back, his expression was earnest. "I'm sorry about your home, but you're safe here for as long as you need." Sophia nodded, unable to find words for her gratitude. As she settled back onto her cot, she realized that amid the loss and chaos, she felt a flicker of something unexpected, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with the kindness of a stranger who had become their savior. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Sophia with its comfort. Her father, still grappling with the loss of their homestead, spent his days helping Flynn repair fences and tend to the cattle. It gave him purpose, a way to repay their host's generosity, though Flynn insisted no repayment was necessary. Sophia took over the running of the household, cooking meals that brought a look of appreciative surprise to Flynn's face. "Been living on beans and coffee for so long, I'd forgotten what real cooking tastes like," he admitted one evening as they sat around the table, savoring the stew she'd prepared. "A man needs more than beans and coffee," James said, seeming more like himself than he had since the fire. "Especially a hard-working man." Flynn's gaze met Sophia's across the table, a spark of something that made her cheeks warm. "Reckon you're right about that, Mr. Keller." As the weeks passed, Sophia began to notice things about Flynn Yates, the way he always made sure her father had the most comfortable chair, the gentle way he spoke to his horses, how he never came to the table without washing up first, no matter how tired he was after a day's work. Small things that spoke of a man raised with respect and consideration. One afternoon, as Sophia hung laundry on the line behind the cabin, Flynn rode in from checking the herd. He dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse to the water trough before approaching her. "Got something for you," he said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small bundle of wildflowers, their purple and yellow blooms bright against the backdrop of the prairie. "Saw these growing by the creek and thought you might like them." Sophia took the flowers, touched by the simple gesture. "They're beautiful, thank you. Figured the place could use a woman's touch," Flynn said, then quickly added, "Not that you need to be touching anything." "I mean, you're a guest, Nada," he stopped, clearly flustered, and Sophia couldn't help but smile at his discomfort. "I know what you meant, Flynn," she said softly, "and I appreciate the thought." He relaxed slightly, returning her smile with one of his own. "Your pa's gone into town with Sam Miller, neighbor from the next valley over. Wanted to inquire about rebuilding, maybe file a claim for new land." Sophia nodded, though the news brought mixed feelings. Rebuilding meant leaving Flynn's ranch, returning to a life that suddenly seemed distant and somehow less appealing than it once had. "Would you like to see something?" Flynn asked, interrupting her thoughts. When she nodded, he gestured toward the corral. "Got a new filly I've been training. She's coming along nicely, might be suitable for a lady to ride." Sophia followed him to the corral, where a beautiful bay filly pranced nervously at their approach. Flynn clicked his tongue softly, and the young horse approached, ears forward with curiosity. "She's lovely," Sophia said, extending her hand for the filly to sniff. "Thought maybe you'd like to learn to ride her," Flynn suggested, watching Sophia's interaction with the horse. "Proper like, I mean, not just holding on for dear life while escaping a prairie fire." Sophia laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been weeks since she'd truly laughed. "I'd like that very much." The riding lessons became a daily occurrence, a chance for them to spend time together away from the cabin and Sophia's father's watchful eye. Flynn was a patient teacher, his hands steady as he guided her through the proper way to mount, how to hold the reins, the subtle commands that guided the horse's movements. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon as they rode side by side along the creek bank. "That filly trusts you already." "I had a good teacher," Sophia replied, glancing at him from beneath the brim of the hat he'd lent her, too large for her head but necessary protection from the summer sun. Flynn's gaze lingered on her face, and for a moment, Sophia thought he might say something more. Instead, he urged his horse forward. "Race you to the big oak," he called over his shoulder. Sophia laughed and gave the filly her head, feeling the exhilaration of speed as they galloped across the open ground. She didn't beat Flynn to the oak tree, but she came close enough to see approval in his eyes when they pulled their horses to a stop. "Not bad for a beginner," he conceded with a grin. They dismounted to let the horses rest, settling in the shade of the massive oak that stood sentinel over the creek. Flynn stretched out his long legs, leaning back against the trunk with a contented sigh. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he confessed. "Used to come here as a boy when Pa was in one of his moods, just sit and listen to the water, watch the birds." Sophia glanced at him, curious about this glimpse into his past. "Was your father very stern?" Flynn considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Not stern exactly, just sad." "Ma died having me, and I think Pa never quite got over it. Didn't know how to raise a boy on his own, especially one that reminded him of what he'd lost." "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly. Flynn shrugged. "He did his best, taught me everything I know about ranching, about being a man. Just wasn't one for showing affection." He picked up a stick, idly drawing patterns in the dirt. "What about your ma? Your pa mentioned she's gone. Influenza when I was 16, Sophia replied, the familiar ache of loss softening with time. "She was beautiful and kind. Loved to sing. Our cabin was always filled with music when she was alive." "And now the music's gone," Flynn said quietly, understanding in his eyes. Sophia nodded, surprised by how easily she could speak of her mother with him. "Pa tried to keep our spirits up, but it wasn't the same. We just learned to live with the silence." Flynn reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his own. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "Maybe it's time to find some new music, Sophia." The way he said her name, so soft and full of meaning, made her heart skip a beat. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw in his blue eyes a reflection of her own longing for connection, for something to fill the empty spaces left by loss. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Flynn cleared his throat and withdrew his hand, standing up with sudden energy. "Best be getting back," he said, though the sun was still high in the sky. "Your pa will be wondering where we've gone off to." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the night of the fire. Sophia wasn't sure what would come of it. Her father spoke often of rebuilding, of reclaiming their independence, while Flynn had made no declarations, offered no promises. But as they approached the cabin and Sophia saw her father waiting on the porch, his expression unusually animated, she knew that change was coming one way or another. "There you are," James called as they dismounted. "Got good news. The land office is offering plots for homesteaders affected by the fire. Prime land, too, with good water access. We could start over, be back on our feet by winter." Flynn's face remained carefully neutral as he took the reins of Sophia's horse. "That's good news indeed, Mr. Keller. When would you be heading out?" "End of the week, if that suits," James replied, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly descended. "Sam Miller's offered to help with the building. Says with enough hands, we could have a basic cabin up before the first snow." Sophia glanced at Flynn, hoping for some reaction, some indication of his thoughts, but he simply nodded, leading the horses toward the barn without meeting her eyes. "Isn't it wonderful, Sophia?" her father asked, his enthusiasm the most energy she'd seen from him since the fire. "Our own place again, no more imposing on Mr. Yates's generosity." "Yes, Pa," Sophia replied automatically, though her heart wasn't in the words. "Wonderful news." That evening, dinner was a subdued affair despite James's continued excitement about their prospects. Flynn ate quickly and excused himself to tend to a fence that didn't really need mending, while Sophia mechanically cleared the table, her mind racing with unspoken words. Later, she found Flynn in the barn, methodically brushing down his stallion though the horse was already gleaming in the lantern light. "You've been avoiding me," Sophia said quietly, closing the barn door behind her. Flynn didn't look up from his task. "Just giving you and your pa space to make your plans." "And what about your plans?" she asked, moving closer, his hands stilled on the brush. "What do you mean? Do they include me?" The question came out more boldly than she'd intended, but Sophia couldn't take it back now, nor did she want to. Flynn finally turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Would you want them to? I'm asking if you want them to." He set down the brush, taking a step toward her. "Sophia, I'm not a wealthy man. This ranch is small, barely supports me and a couple of hands during branding season. I can't offer you much." "I didn't ask what you could offer me," Sophia said, closing the distance between them. "I asked if your plans included me." Flynn's gaze searched her face, looking for something she hoped he would find. "Since the night of the fire," he said slowly, "I haven't been able to think of any plans that don't include you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Sophia's heart raced as Flynn reached out, his hand hovering just shy of touching her cheek. "But your pa has his heart set on that new homestead," he continued. "And you deserve better than a struggling rancher with a small spread and big dreams." Sophia caught his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "What if my dreams include a small spread and the rancher who comes with it?" Flynn's eyes widened with surprise, then darkened with an emotion that made Sophia's breath catch. "Sophia Keller, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Not unless you're coming with me." Flynn's other hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent. "I've been falling for you since the moment I pulled you onto my horse," he confessed. "But I never thought—" Sophia rose on her tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that silenced his doubts. For a moment, Flynn stood frozen in surprise, then his arms wrapped around her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "Your pa is going to have my hide," he murmured. "Not if you ask him properly," Sophia replied, her hands still resting on his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath her palm. Flynn looked at her with such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. "Sophia Keller, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making music in this silent house and turning it into a home?" "Yes," she whispered, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "Yes, Flynn Yates, I will." The kiss that followed sealed their promise, a beginning born from the ashes of what had been lost. And as they walked hand in hand back to the cabin to face her father, Sophia knew that sometimes the most devastating fires could clear the way for new growth, new life, and love that burned even brighter than the prairie flames. James Keller's reaction to their announcement was not what either of them expected. After a moment of stunned silence, he burst into laughter that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Well, it's about time," he said, shaking his head. "Been watching you two circle each other for weeks now, wondering when you'd figure it out." Flynn blinked in surprise. "You're not opposed, sir," James's expression sobered. "Flynn, you rode into a prairie fire to save my daughter's life. You've opened your home to us without question or expectation of repayment. I've watched how you treat Sophia with respect and kindness." He reached out to clasp Flynn's shoulder. "I couldn't ask for a better man for my daughter." Relief washed over Flynn's face and Sophia felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. "What about the homestead, Pa?" she asked. "The new land," James waved a dismissive hand. "That land will still be there if you two want it someday, but I think—" He glanced around the cabin that had become familiar over the past weeks. "I think this place has potential. If you'll have an old man around, that is." "We wouldn't have it any other way," Flynn said earnestly. "This ranch needs all the hands it can get." And, he added with a glance at Sophia, "I suspect it could use some music as well." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, a simple ceremony by the creek under the big oak tree that had become their special place. The entire community turned out neighbors from miles around who had heard the story of Flynn's bravery during the Prairie Fire, who had contributed to rebuilding the community after the devastation. Sophia wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Miller, altered to fit her slender frame with wildflowers in her hair that matched the ones Flynn had first brought her. Flynn, usually seen in working clothes, looked transformed in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows before the traveling preacher, with the creek bubbling beside them and the prairie stretching out beyond, Sophia thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. How a devastating fire had led her to the love of her life, how loss had opened the door to something new and precious. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, and Flynn's kiss was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a future built together from the ground up. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. James Keller surprised everyone by producing a fiddle saved from a neighbor's homestead and playing tunes that hadn't been heard since Sophia's mother was alive. "See," Flynn whispered in Sophia's ear as they danced, "the music's coming back already." As the last of their guests departed and the three of them returned to the cabin, now truly their home, Sophia felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. That night, as Flynn's wife, she discovered new dimensions to the gentle strength she'd glimpsed in him from the beginning. In the years that followed, the Yates ranch flourished under their combined efforts. James proved to be a valuable partner in the operation, his years of experience complementing Flynn's energy and innovation. They expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and added 2 rooms to the cabin, one for James to have his privacy, and another that would eventually house the children they hoped for. When their first child was born, a daughter with Flynn's blue eyes and Sophia's quiet strength, they named her Melody, a testament to the music that now filled their home. James took to grandfatherhood with surprising enthusiasm, carving tiny wooden animals for the baby and singing the old songs that Sophia remembered from her childhood. The Prairie Fire that had nearly claimed their lives became a story told on winter evenings by the fire, a tale not of destruction, but of providence, of how sometimes the things we fear most can lead us to unexpected blessings. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, 5-year-old Melody on Flynn's lap and their 2-year-old son Daniel playing at Sophia's feet, Flynn took his wife's hand and squeezed it gently. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying here instead of starting fresh on that new land?" Sophia looked around at the home they had built together, the thriving garden where wildflowers now grew alongside vegetables, the sturdy corral where the bay mare, now Sophia's own horse, grazed peacefully, the windmill Flynn had constructed last summer that brought water directly to the house. "Never," she replied honestly. "This was always where I was meant to be, with you." Flynn's smile was as warm as the day they met, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. Who would have thought a prairie fire could lead to so much happiness? "Prairie fire runs faster than hooves," Sophia quoted softly, remembering his words from that terrifying night. "But love, it seems, runs faster still." Flynn leaned over to kiss her, Melody giggling between them at the display of affection. And as the sun set on another day on their ranch, Sophia knew that the flames that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead forged something unbreakable, a love as vast as the prairie itself, and just as enduring.